all that?
That happened last week.
I'm live. I mean, it's 7 o'clock.
Say the pledge and then we will.
So we're going to start the presentation, but not the board meeting.
Okay.
Because there's no quorum yet.
Cool.
We're gonna do the pledge.
Yeah.
Starting.
Okay,
we'll do it.
Yeah, call this meeting to order. And the first thing on the agenda is the Pledge of Allegiance. I just did.
We don't have six though. We have five board meetings, 4 members, we can't.
Okay, call it to order.
But there's a movement in the room to have Paul begin his presentation,
Right, before the meeting starts.
because Jason's already seen it. As in fact.
Maybe I'll hold it.
Okay, who's still supposed to come?
Jason for sure, we're not sure about Peter. Just Peter.
Okay, then we can't call it to order until,
Right.
okay, but unofficially, okay, unofficially, we've got Paul Mays here, and, if you want to start your presentation, then we can do that.
All right.
Thank you, Paul.
We know it's informal because I didn't wear my jacket.
There you go.
When the board meeting starts, I'll go with my jacket. So I thank you all for allowing me to speak on behalf of the steering committee and, in fact, the Buildings and Grounds Committee. We met jointly on November 30th as the two committees together to review the work that has been progressing behind the scenes. That is, as the steering committee has been working with the design team to try to develop ideas that would address the issues we've identified over the past few months as part of the master planning process. To follow up on that, since that meeting, we also had a meeting with the staff on December 7th, where we spent an hour and a half with the staff members in order to invite their input as well. And we will be leaving a copy of the schemes in the lounge so that additional input can be solicited from staff members over the next period of time. So now we have a quorum.
That we have a quorum.
Okay. Now we can call, as soon as he gets his photo up. Okay, the meeting is called to order at 7:05 p.m. And now we do the pledge. Okay, now we can go on with the Paul Mays presentation.
So as I was expressing, this will be a bit of a redundancy in that several of you, having been participants on these various committees, have seen this very presentation a few times. Those of you on the steering committee have been part of the development of this all along. As I go through the plan quickly, I want to also say that I will try and express some of the issues that have been addressed, that have been brought up by both staff members and committee members as a path forward. And at the end, we'll talk about what the next steps might be. But this is, again, the resolution of many of the issues that we've identified in the information gathering stage. So when I was last before the Board of Trustees, we talked about how we had gone about that information gathering. We held public meetings, we had surveys, we had a dot exercise both during a We Heard You meeting and in the lobby and so forth. And so we've been really putting together this information and quantifying some of the ideas that have been expressed both by the public as the patrons whom we serve and by the staff as the library professionals who work here and make the library thrive. And so we can identify, and again, this is a quantifiable exercise, in this case, separate ideas expressed by each in terms of priorities, but you can see that certain things do find a prominence. So for example, the idea of a cafe had a 22% approval rate under the public space discussion. The staff space also gave it double digits and 10%. So we know that's an idea that has some wheels in terms of expressing how the services of this library might manifest themselves going into the future. Several other areas of concern from the staff in particular, a robust and imaginative children's room, and we know that that had double digits from the public as well. That's a heavily used space, and we also know that we can quantify that with visits to programs as well as circulation statistics. And in fact, when you look at that figure, robust and imaginative children's room, it includes not just the collection and the space there, but the program spaces, and you'll see how that manifests itself in the designs as well. Indoor reading niches, quiet areas are popular in both addresses, as well as maker space and hands-on spacing and improved patron service. These are things, safety and accessibility came up very large in the public space discussion. So as we move forward with some of the ideas that we're expressing in the staff discussion and this public discussion, we know that program-wise, the traditional collection was one of the unusual numbers. And our feeling, having reviewed those numbers and the results of that, is not that the traditional collection is too small. In fact, statistically, it's large for the size community you have, but rather that this is an idea that we need to show it better and make it available more precisely to the community. I think this is a reflection of the fact that somebody goes to receive or to take out a new and popular book, for example, but they're 16th on the list. It's not really a reflection of the size collection. But we also know that the way we display that collection right now is very closed. We have sets of stacks which are actually perpendicular to our path of travel through the space, and that makes it difficult to even browse in the traditional sense. Non-traditional programs and traditional programs were both popular with the public, as well as technology access as things we should be looking at in the higher numbers. And the staff recognizes, because they're here every day, the necessity not just of improved staff workspace for their own efficiency, but the fact that the building lacks character, restroom access, the finishes are worn, and so forth. And that's just a reflection of the fact that the building is, in fact, coming on 25 years old. As we look at the larger bubbles, these are a reflection of those spaces. And I show this to you as a refresher based on what we talked about last time as a board, but also because this is the cheat sheet. This is what we're using to reference as we look at design ideas and how they could affect these requests, both from the public and the staff. And these are the combined or consolidated results of those statistics. We know that we're working with a space that has a large parking lot between us and Western Avenue and the two adjacent lots, and that may be affected. The last time I presented to the Board of Trustees, someone from the municipality was here as well to talk about a connection to Winding Brook Drive. And so how this sits in these contexts of access to the population can be changed dramatically if, in fact, a road is put here or a connection is put back here, and we have access to Winding Brook as a way to get to Western Avenue. I mentioned earlier that was one of the heavy issues that came up during the safety, particularly from the public, but anyone on the staff knows that. I know that myself.
We have the unimproved road, if that, was improved, that solved that problem.
It would be a step in that direction. I don't believe you own that property in order to make that improvement. But my understanding is right now it's full of potholes and I don't drive it myself. But those are the types of things from working with others. And I frequently do it. Many times I work with libraries that are in the middle of villages that were developed before the vehicle, the motor car, in fact. And so dealing with parking and dealing with safe access oftentimes is something that can't be accomplished by the library itself on its own property. And it means doing double service or working with a municipality or another institution to try and improve that. In this case, we know that the town of Gilberlin has started a sidewalk grant process. We know that the YMCA is an interested factor here as well. So there are several things here that could make this a better situation. The library can't solve it by itself, as we just said, but any improvement like that, I think would actually benefit all of these institutions. Right now, that is one of the key issues, and the Department of Transportation uses their own criteria to evaluate the risk of that intersection. And it doesn't correspond to anything that we're looking at as the library or even the other residents of Mercy Care Lane. We know, as I mentioned, that coming on a quarter century of age, there are a whole series of improvements. I won't go through this all again. We just discussed this the other day, and the committees have been discussing it at length. individually, none of these are catastrophic. We know that there are things that should be maintained and developed over time, and the staff here does a good job of keeping things moving. In fact, the new carpet tile is an example. There are constantly improvements, reworking of the front new and popular area that's happening right now, just rearranging things. These are all good strategies for maintaining the idea that we're a vital institution. But we also know anyone who owns property or a house that over time you do need to put money into not just maintaining, but upgrading and improving things. And if we put this list together as a scope of work or honey-do list of things we have to do, that's well into the six figures when we add them all up. Individually, none of them are major items, but we know we have a few $100,000 of repairs and upgrades and safety improvements made throughout the building, as well as finish improvements. And what we're working with, as we said, is this particular space right now. The master plan is focused on that area and the two adjacent properties as a means of providing a framework for things we can do to make improvements. I mentioned earlier that one of the key things is access to the building. In fact, from Mercy Care Lane, Route 20 is out here. This is Mercy Care Lane. Here's our entry. We know that we frequently have a bottleneck here. The book drops that are located here mean that somebody who stops here to drop into the book drop is actually creating a bottleneck for anybody in this entire parking area. And if we move that over to this area and create a spine through the middle of the parking lot, and what I mean by that is a peninsula that has some grass, some trees and benches, and a sidewalk down the middle, we can do several things. One is we narrow the lane of traffic here, which inherently slows down vehicles that are moving past the front entry very quickly. That's an urban design process where these small peninsulas like this narrow the streets and slow traffic down. We can move the book drop over to this location, which means that somebody stopped there now is only blocking this end and is not, in fact, blocking the main intersection there. It means that handicap parking happens against an actual sidewalk, and they move to the building across a short crosswalk, rather than parking over here and walking through the asphalt driving areas, the driving lanes themselves. And then aesthetically, from Route 20, we can break up this large sea of macadam and actually make it a welcoming boulevard entry on axis with the main entry of the building. If we make improvements at the upper level as well, we could add another 50-some parking spaces, and depending what happens with any addition or improvements at this end, we might make a connection to the building from the upper level, or barring that, a connection down to a plaza area outside the main entry. The other thing, taking advantage...
Is your parking garage, then is it upper level?
No, the upper level, meaning the topography here is higher than the topography down here.
Oh, okay, you don't need a parking garage.
That's correct.
Level parking.
No, there would be very little access to a lower level, and my concern often with urban libraries with whom we work, parking garages present a tenancy and safety issue as well over a period of time. I don't think we have the parking dilemma that some libraries do that would necessitate a two-level addition of parking space, but adding 50-some spaces there in addition to the 73 here and the staff parking on this side should accommodate the library well into the future.
What makes you think the DOT would allow the curb cut in the center?
It exists now. Yeah, there is a curb cut onto that property now, so we would essentially
Yeah,
be
and
wanting to do that.
they would allow it to go for the library parking lot?
I can't speak for the DOT specifically, but typically when there's an existing curb cut and you own that property, as long as you maintain the width of that curb cut, that should be an approvable project. Right. Now, we're just looking at the potential for the future. This doesn't have to happen right away, but amongst the library improvements to the parking lot here, we know that by creating this peninsula and doing the nice things that that does, if we do want to add space, when, for example, there's bus trips, and people clog this parking lot because something like that is happening, this is a nice venue then for daytime parking for things like that. The other thing we added because of access to the electrical service to the sign that's out by Route 20 is the fact that we could have recharge stations for electrical cars and be at the front end of things that relate to efficiency and sustainability. In fact, one of our libraries, the Herkimer Library, is doing a pilot program with an electric charging station at its library in its parking lot right now. In fact, there are grants that are available specifically for that piece. Combine that with things the town is doing for sustainability grants, and again, we're building a synergy of a whole series of institutions working together to make improvements for the whole community. As we get to the building, I'm just orienting everybody with the existing conditions plan, but we come in, it's actually oriented so that south is at the top and north is at the bottom, but that's because the main entry then comes in here. We're in this meeting room, the small meeting room is here, Center over here, and then the large spine. And all of you recognize that that spine is on axis all the way across from the windows at the far end of the quiet reading area lounge, all the way to the windows behind this very screen we're looking at. Typically administrative areas up here, and back of house space, the adult collection and the children's collection, and the very small children's program room. One of the key features that we kept hearing about is the lack of accessibility to children's program or size for children's programming because of the size of that room and the way it's oriented. I'm going to actually move through a couple of these because most of you have seen them, and I'm going to say that we've looked at, as a committee, 6, 7 different schemes over time as we've developed and consolidated the ideas. But I'm actually going to move, because it's a board meeting and you have a full agenda tonight. These are very similar. One is a single story and one is a 2-story version. But right to the recommendation of the committee, or the consensus so far in terms of how we might develop things as a starting point. This is very conceptual in nature. It's not ready to be put out yet, but we know that there are a lot of key ideas expressed here that we want to develop further. One of them is the fact that the gray areas that you see remain relatively unchanged. That is, we have a successful large meeting room here, particularly with the acoustics, and for most functions the size works very well. We don't want to interfere with the storage in the kitchen and the small meeting room, and the fact that they are off of that lobby area. The restrooms, although they need refinishing and an upgrade, they are actually sized very well and they're in a good location. What we do propose doing is taking the end of that storage room and creating a family restroom there. In other words, a non-gender specific restroom with a single fixture that allows families, or as an example, I have a child with autism. It's very difficult to send some people into public restrooms without worrying about their safety. This takes away some of those issues as well as gender identity issues. The rest of the space can remain relatively unchanged, and you'll see that we've made other improvements that make this space more vital. One is by creating a larger space. Right now that corridor is only this wide. We've actually broken into this broader space to cut back on how long this dead-end corridor is, but to make what we call a town square. So off of this space, which again is outside the library proper, we can still lock the doors here, for example, but off of this town square, we have a small meeting room, a large meeting room, a new meeting space or conference room that seats 8 to 12 people, and a perpetual book sale room. That is, the Friends of the Library or other groups can hold an actual book sale space. Their storage remains over here, but now there's a public space. They do have access to the back of the house, but by locking those doors, these can be open to the public, as can the meeting rooms, even when the library is closed. So additional benefit in terms of study and tutoring space, additional benefit in terms of freedom when the book sale happens, and of course by its proximity to these rooms, the book sale on larger events can still be certain times of the year in the larger rooms. But by having a permanent book sale, they tend to be more profitable, and they tend to engender more volunteers to work in them when there's a place to be and to call their own. The other changes we were proposing up here, and some of these are still under consideration, are that we moved the assistant director and the treasurer to a space here and created an administrative bullpen that was a little more efficient in size. And we had suggested taking the IT room, which is currently here, and moving it central. We know that the ACS technical services area, which is a back of house space, is actually somewhat larger than it needs to be. We can create some efficiencies by cutting into that space a little, but the problem is when we gain space there, what can we actually do with it? In other words, that's a back of house space we can't make public necessarily. We can't create a new meeting room back here. It would be hard to get to. It would be a staff meeting room only. Now, we've talked a little bit since the initial presentation of this, and we're going to continue to talk with IT and the people affected here to find the best solution. So we know that some IT components are going to the cloud and that the idea of the rack system may change dramatically. The idea here was to try and create an environmentally controlled space central to the building as opposed to having an exterior wall. But all of that is sort of up for discussion, how that might all function. It may be that it stays where it is and we make other changes on this side. One of the issues is that the lounge, which is back here, the staff lounge, this access to it, we want to keep it here because of the exterior windows, and we've introduced a door out to the plaza area, which which doesn't exist now, but would benefit staff taking breaks there. But this was the space we could gain, so now we want to find a good solution for how we put all of these pieces together. One of the other common complaints that came from staff, the public wouldn't even know about it, is that the 2 restrooms that are there, they're both single fixture unisex restrooms, are often overused. That is, somebody's on a 15-minute break and they can't use the restroom because somebody's actually in it. So we introduced the idea of 2 new water closets, although maybe it's 1 water closet and storage, but the idea is to improve staff access to restrooms and make it a hospitable area for everyone. You can see that the back of house space for ACS at Circulation now has actually become a back of house space. Currently, as you come into the building, the desk has been cut back, but you can, from here, look into this whole area, and everything that happens there is in public view, and in fact can create some inefficiencies as people have to jump up and solve problems at the desk. What we've done here is actually created a bullpen back of house space, keeping in mind the sequencing of operations with the 2-cart system that's currently used at processing at these desks, a circulation office with windows into the circ area and the staff area. And you can see that as you come into that main lobby, we have a through-wall book drop here, meaning returns are being done to the back of house space rather than at the desk, creating more efficiency and allowing the people at the desk, the staff at the desk, to actually focus on patron service, which is really what we want them to be doing. So there are multiple stations at the desk that are quick serve and then back of house here. And they have access in multiple places to other areas. So from the town hall area or town square, we have some public spaces, and now we've come into the library proper. One of the key changes is taking the Talicentha room and actually creating a cafe there. One of the reasons for that location is the high profile, the visibility from the street and the parking lot, and it's one of those first things as you come in. Off of this town square, the idea is that, say, a morning yoga class in the large meeting room could then actually grab coffee before they leave. All that can be open even when the library is closed. But one of the other benefits of putting the cafe in this area is that we can access this new plaza area. When I talked earlier about improvements on the site, that was an area that we saw as an opportunity to dress up the front of the building, to make it a little less commercial and a little more civic in nature. By having an outdoor seating area with ties to the cafe, now staff, patrons, even waiting for pickup, this becomes a popular and visible, active area. That is, people see, who are driving by on Route 20, activity at the library. They see people outside doing things, not 1 or 2 people at a bench, but actually activity, picture umbrellas, cafe tables, and so forth in certain months. Even the rest of the year, though, access from the library or from the lobby means that cafe can be an active participant in the experience here. We know one of the teens, I remember Tim was particularly impressed in speaking to some of the groups that mentioned that a cafe is a teen space. You don't even, in some cases, need a teen space if you've created that. We've taken what was the PPS area, those offices that are very narrow and cramped into a space along here, and in fact created another meeting room. So we're reflecting on the fact that tutoring and quiet meeting space is important, and then created a series of study rooms as well, and then the local history room at the end here. This local history room, as opposed to the, which is right now the compressed storage at that end, reflects an increase of 106% in space for local history, which was another area that was identified as one of the priorities. Under the spine, that tall area of the building, we've tried to keep these as low mobile stacks and easy-to-move chairs and 2 top tables. And part of the reasoning for that is that even when meetings are so large that they can't be held here, you wouldn't do this every week or even every month, but a few times a year, you might push these mobile stacks and chairs to the side and create a large space for a gala-type event under that main spine of the building. That's the architectural feature that's there. It has a certain architectural drama to it, and it gives us another space, if you will, to find different sizes for different events. Now, you don't, as we say, design a church for Easter Sunday and Christmas morning, the 2 days that it's always that big, but you want to have the flexibility to accommodate those larger groups when necessary. The larger stacks head back this way, and you can see we've created technology and open table areas so that we've broken up these long expanses of tunnels, and the help desk has moved to this end. This allowed us to take the PPS offices from here and put them in this area, which makes them central to the children, the new children's area, and the adult services area. So instead of being at a help desk here and then cramped along this space, now we've made them central to the two key areas that they're serving. One of the issues here, and we want to work out what's happening in the layout, is natural light in this space. One idea may be to create a monitor or a cupola on top over this space that brings natural light in there and perhaps even extends into the children's area or extends out here. That came from a staff comment. Another may be the rearrangement of this space. We do want more visual access to a young adult area we created here. Your young adults were very vocal in the discussions I had with stakeholders in terms of the things they'd like to see and that they would come to use in the library. We gave them this space here because it has exterior windows, but we probably want a more positive connection that is visual supervision from the PPS workspace into the young adult area. But in this puzzle, we also want to fit these three pieces, which is a series of restrooms. Probably not right off of, as it's shown here, the PPS workspace. There's an awkwardness to having a door right next to your desk that opens into a restroom. You know that now, don't you? Back where you are in the current administrative space. But having said that, we did want access to a program room, a public restroom at this end, so people studying here don't have to pick up all of their things, come all the way to this end of the building to use the restroom, and then very likely never return to their space. It's not hospitable for spending the day. But the young adult space now would have access as an adult collection, that is treating them as adults and letting them come into this space without going through a children's room, which is a stigma we try to avoid. But they also have access to a program room, one that can be specifically scheduled at different times to be a children's program room, because it comes right off the children's room, or a teen program room. Depending on the time of day, it would work out either way. And that space is part of an addition we're proposing at the end of the building, a much smaller addition than had been proposed in your referendum several years ago, but one that allows us to take the children's room, expand it, and grow it into this space, create that program room with storage, access to restrooms, a family restroom in the children's room area, and then the PPS workspaces have desks that look both into adult and into children's. And then we also created an activity room at this end for drop-in play or drop-in events. That is unscheduled or non-traditional events. We know libraries are very good at creating story hours or specific seminars or specific talks, but this is literally like a playground in a way. Young families, young adults come in and they have quick access to the children's collection, and there's glass separating them from the adult collection, but that's also another program space. It could be scheduled at certain times for adult usage as well. So overall in this scheme, a few things I wanted to point out are the fact that the PPS workspace, by moving from here to this area, increases by 151%. That it's not 151% of what it was, it increases by 151%. The children's room went up slightly from where it is now by 10%, but the program space went up 230%. So the idea is that the collection in the children's room remains relatively the same, but the opportunities by having the program room off of it allow them to do many more things. And when you look at them in conjunction, then obviously it's a significant increase. The young adult space increased by 87%. The adult collection itself, remember that was one of those big bubbles we saw in the comments, increased by 28%, which means we have opportunities to better show off the collection and make it accessible as we go forward. Those are some of the big changes in terms of size. The administrative area remained roughly the same because we were using most of this space over, and there's some shifting that we have to do with IT and some of the other spaces there. And a few of the things that lost a little bit of space, we, as I mentioned, adult tech services would become more efficient so that we could gain some space there, but they don't use all of that space at the moment, so we want to make that as usable as possible in as many areas as possible. There's also a few of the administrative areas that go down by single-digit percentages, relatively small. The meeting rooms remain relatively the same because remember we have the Talacenta room, which is no longer Talacenta. It moved to meeting room and local history, and then we gained this meeting room up here. So it ends up being almost a balance or a wash in the end. So those are the general ideas that were proposed to look at for improvement. The reason we wanted to bring it forward at this point is to keep the master plan moving, make sure we're going in the right direction. The steering committee shared it with the Buildings and Grounds Committee. We shared it with the staff. We've asked them to use discretion. It's not ready to be presented as a project. We're not at that point. There are so many things to discuss here that relate to the phasing, the timing and sequencing of when things would happen, or even the structuring of how it would be financed, for example. We had a conversation with the school, who is doing a project as well. We want to coordinate with that. That may mean it's financed in a similar way, or it may mean that we're just coordinating schedules with each other to make sure we're supporting each other's projects. So there are many different things that are still to be worked out in terms of the path forward. But having said that, in terms of the general concept and the details that we know we need to work on, this is something that should be brought to the board, even though most of you have already seen pieces of it to date. But we wanted to make sure that you were formally on board with where we were. The idea would be that by the January board meeting, we're going to have a January committee meeting of the steering committee as well. We would have a sense of what your comments might be. We're waiting staff comments now. There have been a few. We're gathering them as we go. But we feel like this answers a lot of the questions that were asked during the information gathering phase. And as such, is a reasonable and responsible way to deal with bringing this library forward for the next 50 to 100 years. Tim? Oh, sorry.
Well, I was just going to say, I spoke to Brian on the phone a day or two ago, and, getting Paul here to present was obviously our goal. But I didn't have a sense from Brian yet what our next goal would be. And so what I was telling Paul just before the meeting is that Brian thinks it's reasonable to give the board about a month to digest the plan. Obviously, if you have questions tonight, bring them up. If you want to email me questions, I'll file from the 11 board members straight to Paul. I don't know that Brian, as president, can tell you whether he would want to take a meeting, or take a vote.
Oh, now you can.
There we go, good, perfect. But designing the next step is what we were talking about on the phone. So,
My suggestion would be that since I've reviewed this, some of you have seen it a few times, some of you are seeing it the first time, but I've gone through this fairly quickly, and obviously I'm here to answer any questions you may have. But next week I could send a copy of this plan. Again, it's not for distribution yet, but a copy of the plan and a brief discussion of the highlights so that you can review that at your leisure over the holidays, and we can talk again in January as we have committee meetings set up and so forth. So this isn't your only chance to see this, and then I take the slide down and say good luck. I can send something out by early next week that you folks will have to review, taking your time. It would be prudent, in my experience, is that all comments come funneled through the same location. So if they can come through Tim, that just keeps things organized rather than hearing from 10 different parties.
Could we have a committee meeting scheduled for January?
I don't think we did either. I asked Tim and we both looked at each other and said, So we do have to schedule one. That's true. Yes.
Since the last meeting,
Yes.
one thing that I was thinking about, in either the children's area or in the children's drop-in play area, should we not, maybe in combination with one of the bathrooms, have like a sink
Yes.
where they could wash paintbrushes and
Right.
finger paints? And
We have that in the program room that's shown along here is a cleanup area and storage cabinets. But it may well be that we also want to add one down here. We have a plumbing core up here right now. We have a family restroom here. And then, again, we're going to rework probably how these restrooms go. But if we keep all the plumbing in that location, then this end is probably the most likely scenario. Whether we add plumbing down here might be a cost-benefit analysis to look at, because there is no other plumbing in that area. But it's definitely in the program area for crafts and projects like that. You're absolutely right.
just to follow up to plumbing.
Yes.
In that staff area,
Over
having
here?
two additional restrooms to me seems overkill.
Right.
If you change the male-female restrooms to unisex restrooms,
Right.
I think your problem will be very easily solved.
It may well be. And as I mentioned as I was presenting this, because you and I had talked about that before, it's come up. Staff has asked for additional restrooms. Whether we create 2 new ones or 1 new one, or how we work that out is still up for question. Storage is always an issue. We can always use storage anywhere. And we're going to be looking at this whole space, particularly because we want to make sure IT is in a good spot to do what they need to do. And so so there's probably another conversation with the IT folks as well, particularly about how the racks and their work areas are going to go in the future.
I got the impression from Paul's statement that staff are not allowed to use the restrooms except on their break. Is that true? Okay.
I didn't mean to imply that. But what I was saying is, when they are on a break or in a hurry, and there's only 2 restrooms and they're both occupied, that was some of the comment. Those were some of the comments I was hearing.
In the hallway, then,
Yes, there are public restrooms as well.
you're right, 3 or 4 there.
Exactly.
The 2 existing staff restrooms, as you probably know, are unisex. And you could, to my mind, solve the problem that's perceived in the back hallway by adding only 1 and making it also unisex. But there are times when there are 2 people waiting to use the 2. Now, I'm on record, say, go use the public restroom. Our public restrooms, hopefully this will be addressed in the renovation, are, dated and cold, and staff often don't want to go there. But some of the staff do, including me. I find it a way to monitor the status of the public restroom, obviously only men's, but I go there myself and I try to get out of the way of the problem.
It's an idea that's worth vetting, but as I said, we were trying to respond to all of the comments we
They're
received.
not heated enough. You said they were cold.
There's a problem in the men's room anyway, getting it warm in the winter. So.
The other issue is we are adding other staff going up in the operator as well.
That's right.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yep.
And I think that makes sense. As I mentioned, one of the comments from the public in particular was the idea of being at this end of the building, always having to come all the way over here. People would be reluctant, and understandably so, to use the one in the children's program room,
Wonderful.
if you want. Yeah. So, in that case, yes.
So the question I've been meaning to ask you is, and it's a 2-part question. One, for the benefit of anyone who hasn't seen the presentation before, if you could use your pointer to draw a line, and on the right of it is old space, and on the left of it is new space. And then, how much square footage is that new space, and what is it percentage-wise? Like, is it a 20% increase or a 15% increase?
That addition is shown as including this area. So it's this L, right? This whole body is about 6,132 square feet. That represents a 22% increase in the total building. The total building now existing is 27,380. That would be 6,000 and change.
And will we do the bonding?
Those are things to discuss. One of the things you've heard me talk about previously is the advantage of multiple phases of a project in order to maximize funding through the DLD grant on an annual basis. One other option that we've talked to the school about is a referendum in conjunction with their work or separately. There are lots of things we want to think about. Even in a project that was funded all at once, we would want to think through phasing. And the reason I say that is it's very unlikely you would want to move out to a temporary space to accomplish all the renovations, which means we need to renovate a space at a time and then move into it and keep it.
There may be problems with those grants in the next few years.
There may be, that's right. And certainly, there's an efficiency of scale to doing a project at one time. And that's something to consider. There's also an even bigger efficiency of scale to doing a project in conjunction with the school district, for example, and getting the benefit of that type of pricing. But we need to work through all of those options and what works best for the library as we go.
Expanding that a little bit further, maybe another 4 feet out or.
Right. And those are lots of, as we mentioned last time, we have a stormwater treatment area over here that we want to make sure we maintain that strategy. But we're going to, as the committee moves forward, keep looking at things like that. You're absolutely right. Sometimes that 4-foot difference can make a huge change in what you're able to do or not do. So rest assured, it's on the table of something we're going to be exploring in conjunction with rethinking some of these areas as well. Any other questions? I apologize, those of you who sat through it before. But it's important that the board officially be on record as having looked at the information. As I said, I encourage you on your free time to look through what I'll send you next week and think it through. And then in January, Chris will we'll have to set up a committee meeting, so we'll probably do that by email.
Sure.
But do that quickly, just so we have it.
I mean, could we theoretically do it now?
I could.
Okay, let's do it.
And I personally, I can't speak for the board, but schedule a audit committee on the 2nd of January?
I gave 3 days.
The 2nd?
So I'm working on the second meeting.
Oh.
How many,
There is a slight response there that Alex can do the 2nd or the 8th. So we should, yeah, so we should avoid those 2 dates, unless you want to pick one of them.
I'll
As,
just pick whichever one they can't do.
okay. So the 2nd and the 8th are available of January from the library's perspective. I don't know about yours.
the 8th is not available, the 2nd, I could make it. I would actually like a little more time to
Yeah.
work on this before we meet, otherwise we're just meeting for the sake of meeting.
10th?
I'm at a library in Connecticut on the 10th. I could do the 11th, I could do the 18th.
The 11th is a board meeting, right?
Oh, okay. The 16th or 18th.
The 18th is a foundation meeting, but I can,
Before the board meeting? Some of you guys already did it.
that's a good thought.
We haven't planned so many meetings then, so. Do it earlier though.
4:30.
We usually meet at 4:30.
Let's do that night, 4:30.
The 11th at 4:30.
Yeah.
Triple header.
You what?
Yeah, triple header. Design steering, finance, and board. By the time the board meeting starts, we should all be so tired we'll have a quick board meeting. So,
The 11th at 4:30, and that's a combined committee meeting? Okay.
That's it.
We will, what my plan would be is to focus on a format that's similar to what we've been doing with the steering committee, in that we'd be reviewing design revisions reflecting comments that have come from the committee. If that's acceptable to everybody. Okay. So look forward, I will send the email to Tim next week and have him forward it to all the appropriate members. Okay?
thank you so much.
If there are no other questions, I'll clean up.
Any other questions for Paul?
I think it sounded like you guys already talked about this, but if you have any questions, comments, or whatever, go through Tim. I think that's the best medium to kind of get this process going. That way you can kind of be the repository and also just that way we don't have tons of comments flying around. So, all right. Now we can move to treasurer report.
Unless, of course, just as an addendum to that, like if you're making comments to me to pass on to Paul about a design plan, it would seem to me, and tell me if I'm wrong, Brian, but it would seem to me that if they just sent them to the full board email list, it was my job to send them on to Paul. That way the other board members would know, let's say you sent some comments, would you want all the rest of the board members to hear your comments? Does that make sense? Or,
Yeah.
so just send them to the full board list, which I believe I'm on, right, John? And I will, once I hear like Herb's comments, I'll just pass them on.
Thank you so much.
That way we're all in the loop.
One last thing is for the record, I've handed Margaret 11 by 17 of the plans to be placed in the staff lounge so that the staff has a chance to review. I have asked the staff at that meeting at its discretion, again, it's not a plan we're ready to present just yet, but that their comments are invited and so it will be placed there. Sure. Okay.
Treasurer's report. Your timing is impeccable.
You're in a lot.
accounting class, I actually understand what half the stuff means.
A question, are there copies of it here tonight for Brian to sign?
No, what Brian is actually going to, well, I don't know the answer to that. What Brian is actually going to sign is not the return itself, he's going to sign an e-file authorization form.
Okay.
Do we have that from Vince? No.
Well, just let me know, keep me in the loop, and,
Yeah.
You don't live too far away,
yeah,
so.
you got it. Beautiful. All right, I think we're,
What would be the effect if the state, our state aid is cut by 10%?
Could not tell you, I don't think we get that much in state aid, do we?
And money from the Upper Hudson Library, that was cut by 10% too.
What money do we get from our,
Not much.
Right, yeah,
Maybe we
that's
pay them, you know.
I mean, we pay them.
We might have to pay them more if their budget is being cut.
Correct.
You know.
Yeah, because that's what might happen, that the budgets, the whole thing might be cut by 10%.
That's,
Get across the board cut.
Yeah.
that's great to know because as we go into budget writing, and that's no problem, but that is not something Tim Burke has told directors yet. When he does, or when you tell our board, we're going into budget writing, so we can just up that category to make sure to cover the,
Yeah, any shortfalls that may be there, yeah.
so.
I mean, if UHLS has a budget shortfall and we have to contribute another 10%, probably only another $5,000. In terms of what do we get in state aid, I don't think we get all that much state aid. I mean, the lion's share of our budget, more than probably 94-95% is tax.
True.
Did we pay the retirement
We did.
in November?
It's the check is sitting right here, but we paid it early to save 2,400 or so.
What
Two
was
hundred.
expected?
I think it was right in target. Correct. The retirement check was not off target from what we had budgeted. We budgeted 250, right? And then we paid 232.
Yeah.
Yeah, which is typically what we do every year, so, yeah. We'll probably budget 250 again,
Right.
you know.
You never know, I mean, that's a lot.
yeah, the retirement regime, that's been fluctuating a lot, so,
Yeah.
Well, stock market did well this year.
you'd think, but seems to drop down. All right, any questions, concerns, thoughts? All right, thank you, Kate. As
You're
always, pleasure.
Thank you.
All right. Public input session, number 1. Any comments from the public? Surprise. All right, let's do some committee reports. Building and grounds.
We didn't have a meeting, but I believe most of us were here for his previous presentation.
I could just add to that, we're moving forward on the heat pumps project and preparing the documents. I can't remember, I know that I wrote about that in the director's report, but the plan is to go to bid between mid-January and February 9th or 10th. And pick a bid for that period. So we're moving ahead there.
So I guess now is a good time to talk about bid picking process. Not for that. Are we going to set up a committee just like we did the RFP, or how does it typically?
Okay, so typically, I think what we do typically is this is one reason we hire the firm to manage the bidding process. So they will help us issue the advertisement and the I guess it's called an RFP, with the bid documents are basically what they call them informally. We get them out there, we answer questions for 3 weeks, and then we have a public event at the library. I got an email at about 5:30 suggesting a particular day and time for that event, where you open the bids in public. Some companies send representatives to watch that process. And then we are bound to take not necessarily the lowest bid, but what's called the lowest responsible bid. So we look for Lou, who is our construction manager on this, and the engineering firm, and the combined third most important factor, my wisdom and Margaret's, and we make sure that the bids are addressing the project, that they can actually do what they say they can do. So if there's a bid that is not responsible, is the term that's used, we can reject that bid.
us just to make sure that we're picking the right bit, but,
Sounds like you've got a lot of professionals. I mean, obviously, if any board members want to be there, you are, my viewpoint, more than inclined to go, but.
a meeting like that is always nice to have a board member or 6, if you can get it.
Yeah.
But it's probably gonna be at 2 in the afternoon, which would limit many of your ability to be there.
Well, I guess just let us know whenever it gets
Yeah.
scheduled, let us know, and, you know, if people can go, great, if not, that's the break.
Super.
Okay. So, move to finance.
So we have a program, we have a, given to a budget timetable set forth for the, budget for finance committee. That's what we're meeting, and, the board members are certainly welcome to attend.
Any chance of changing some of the dates, or are they fixed this on?
They could be changed, not tonight probably.
Any dates on Jewish holidays?
This is a good question.
Why are these public? It's,
No, it's not what this committee.
oh, well, meetings are public, but.
Oh, yeah, but they're not, I don't think it, truthfully, I don't think it matters.
It might be a good idea just to take a gander.
I'm digging up my email about when the first 2 days of Passover are, just to make sure that, that we're not planning a meeting, because we've had some vocal, well, we lost a board member with this issue, and we've also had other members of the public that were vocal about it. Passover, the first 2 days are the most important days according to my Jewish contacts, and they're Saturday, March 31st, and Sunday, April 1st. We don't have anything scheduled there, and Sunday we're closed anyway, because that's also Easter. So,
Just put my 2 cents in, if you hold a meeting on Good Friday, I don't come with that.
okay.
April 1st is
You
when
wanna go,
the
they don't
budget,
wanna go, then.
when we should know what the state budget is.
There's all kinds of holidays, all the time, and it could be sensitive to all of them.
I know, so we should be. Why would we want to do something like that? That to me would be crazy. We don't have that, I would assume.
We don't have anything on Good Friday, which would be March 30th then, right? We don't.
I'm just saying, if the committee can meet that night, it's not, to me, it's not. They're open to the public, they don't know.
So I'm saying, personally, it matters to people, so why would we want to?
Yeah, and I don't disagree with that, but.
Folks not coming to these meetings anyway, so I don't know why we have to be sensitive to people who aren't coming.
Opportunity would be there.
Well, I had a question. So we have a public hearing on the final approved budget after our budget's like submitted and done. That seems, does that always have to be done? That seems very odd. So the public is commenting on a budget.
Their question.
So they can't, so it's, all right, so to answer their question, it's not just for them to give input?
It's to explain the budget. I think that's the purpose of it. You could certainly have it earlier.
What, is that like required, or is it just something that's something we've just done?
Good question.
Don't know. I can find out.
Yeah, I wonder if we're not
I think it's
supposed to,
just something that's done.
yeah. Does that ever,
I think it's just gonna be voted on. This gives us, everybody has questions to answer their questions.
I could submit the whole calendar to Chris Lanchanton, and I'm sure in a day or two we'd know whether we were proposing anything illegal, if you want to have me do that.
typically, a local government, in which essentially we are, would have a public hearing before they adopt something. So I don't know if maybe at some point, that's what this originally was, and it somehow got moved till after.
Our board meetings are public the whole time, so they can certainly come to the board meeting when we're actually discussing the budget and voting on it.
Yeah, oh, yes, of course.
Brian, I think you're saying is that give them the opportunity ahead of time before it's finalized and
Yes.
submitted to the school district. That makes sense.
Yeah, I mean, 'cause quite simply, like, well, first of all, I don't remember anyone ever asking questions, but then on the other hand, I've never heard anyone, like, comment on our budget, but, the budgets are fairly self-explanatory. You'd think you'd have more likely people come and comment on what we're proposing than comment on what is essentially adopted.
Well, the state budget is due on amendment before the school district budget adoption.
Okay.
But you have a timetable too. In other words, you have to submit so many days, before. So sometimes you have to submit before you
Yeah.
know what the budget is.
I don't think you want a public.
Yeah,
hearing.
well, we'll have to do that, but then the state
Oh, yeah,
budget,
yeah.
we might not know until April
They-
first, and if they make,
At this point,
large cuts like they may very well do, there may be some,
we have a
amendment
special
that has to be
meeting in
made.
February, and we could have a meeting in March.
So we have a,
Reason I was asking about this, that week of the 13th, is there any chance of moving that, say, to the 8th or the 7th or the 6th?
You talking about March? Oh, February.
Yeah, because I'm on that committee and I'm gone from the 9th on.
9th of
And
February.
the last year, what we did, we had a meeting just before I left and then a meeting after we got back, which would be after instead of the 6th, it'd be after the 9th of March.
And I'm quite possibly gone on the 5th through the 9th of February, so, I mean,
Okay.
It was basically just set up so it was like every couple of weeks. To give time to work on this stuff. So you're gone the week of the 5th?
it's, and then Barbara's gone the week of the 13th, but
So but you're going back by the 27th?
By the way, those cookies are from Paul Maze's firm.
I see that.
And there's also dark chocolate caramels that we're hoping to get rid of.
As long as it's not a conflict of interest.
Well, when we first met with Technical Building Systems over at Heat Pumps, Margaret would let them buy us lunch.
if I
So,
can't be at the meeting,
because she's
then
good that way.
you can fill me in.
Yeah, which
I'd like to be there, but if, that's fine.
So I guess the big question is whether, would you say by what date, by the end of that second week?
Because if you change it, I may not be going.
Gotcha.
There's a conference. I'm not registered yet, so we'll see what happens.
so that,
I mean, I have no problem doing it the week of the 5th sometime, it's just that, we have to give the staff time to.
you guys want to talk about it, between
Yeah.
meetings, and, figure it out. I maybe have, I guess, then I'd still like to have a public hearing, and I know no one's gonna attend, but it would make more sense to me to have a public hearing before we approve the final budget than,
Yeah, so I think if we're gonna do that, we need a February meeting just for the budget.
just for the budget. What about the 13th and 15th? Isn't that a board meeting?
It is,
No,
but
we don't have a meeting.
I'm sorry,
No, what
I
I'm
said
saying
15th
is-
of March.
if we are, but if we're gonna have, we can't have a public meeting before the board's seen the budget, that's what I'm saying. If the board's seeing the budget on the 15th, you're gonna have a public hearing before the board's seen the budget?
Won't you guys have reviewed the budget and
The
everything?
committee will,
But not the full board.
Not the full
the board won't have seen it.
All right, I guess we can have a.
What if you change the 412 meeting, just change the name? Presentation, public presentation. It implies that the public can say something if they wish. You still got some time to change it if there's some issue.
I guess, do we even need to have it at all?
There's that question too.
Um,
Where, if I understand Chris correctly, they can come to every meeting.
Yeah.
Exactly,
that's-
I never felt like it was worthwhile because no one ever comes.
No,
This
this
is
is
a transparency thing, don't you?
That's what.
But it's, I guess I don't think it is a transparency thing, 'cause it's done after it's adopted, like, it seems to serve no purpose, so I don't know why it's here, and I guess I'm wondering if we could get rid